This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation. Today, I'm joined by Justin, who was part of a larger group conversation that we had, and it focused on resiliency. But I wanted to invite Justin back just to have a conversation at some level about the topic at hand, but also to learn more about him as a person. So Justin, welcome to In Character.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Who's Justin for all of us who may not know who you are?
So I've taught second grade mostly over the last 20 years, always teaching children of color living in poverty. I became a dad about 12 years ago. I think that always shapes who you are as a teacher. And for me, the biggest thing about becoming a dad was I realized that all I really want for my son and daughter is two things. I want them to be good people, and I want them to be happy people who lead purposeful lives. And I feel like the exact same thing is true of my job as a teacher. I've taught in Northwest Arkansas, mostly English learners, for the last roughly 16 years.
Would you consider the part of Arkansas you teach in rural, urban, suburban? What's the mix?
I actually never know how to answer that question. I teach in a town that's about 70,000. It's gone from being almost 100% white a generation ago to now about 40% Latino and maybe 5% Marshall Islanders. And so it's really changed dramatically. And, again, the majority of my students are first and second generation immigrants. And that's true to some extent of the region, but at our school, it's pretty extreme. It's probably, each year I have usually one white student, one African-American student, 4 or 5 Marshallese kids, and the rest are Latinx, mostly from Mexico and El Salvador.
We rarely have an opportunity to talk about the different diversity within Southern states. How did the population that's beginning to grow in your area arrive? What was the attraction? What's the keep? And what's your role as a teacher in building not only their resiliency, but also keeping your resiliency as an educator?
For the Latino population, it's mostly low-wage jobs that we need and never think about, like processing chickens in chicken plants. That's part of why they've been hit so hard by COVID, is it's been largely through the Tyson and other companies plants. With the Marshallese community, it's a little bit different because it actually all goes back to one person in the 1960s who brought his extended family and they brought theirs, and it just kept growing and growing. One of the things I think a lot about is that when we're welcoming a child into our classroom, sometimes we're also welcoming their family into a new country and a new culture and a new language. And I think as a dad, again, I think about what it takes to leave your country and leave your grandparents and cousins, which a lot of families in our region have done. So I feel like it creates kind of a greater responsibility for the teacher. As far as resiliency for us, I think one of the hardest things is that we see kids who really aren't having some basic needs met in terms of food security or housing. And so I think, sometimes schools end up playing this role that really should be played by the broader society, and I know teachers who pay families' utility bills and, teachers who send home food out of their own pocket with kids. And so there's just those deep needs. At the same time, the same thing that's exhausting is also what renews you in the job, is that the kids are so wonderful. I think about this little guy named Cesar who won $10 in a writing contest. And I asked him what he was going to do with the money. And I thought he'd say, that he was going to save up for a video game or something. And he said, oh, I'm going to give this money to my mom to help her buy food for our family. So you see these kids from a very young age have a really strong sense of, responsibility and family and contributing to their immediate family and extended family too. So they're just wonderful human beings to get to know.
Are you a native of Arkansas?
I am. Yeah, I grew up in Stone County, Arkansas until about 3rd grade, and now I'm back in the town that I lived in really from 3rd grade on. So I was gone 8 years teaching in New York City, went out to California to do a master's in elementary ed. But yeah, I've been, in Arkansas since I was a little baby, and then in this current region since 3rd grade.
If memory serves me correctly, TFA Connection?
That's right. Yeah, New York City, I was part of the 2000 core, and then felt like I really needed kind of a deeper foundation in child development and some of my weaker areas like teaching science. And so I did a 2-year master's after that in elementary ed at UC Berkeley, and then ended up coming back home.
Excellent. So you've also won an award for the great work that you've done, and we'll get to that. When you talk to people and say, you know what, I'm teaching young students, often we don't see men teaching at your grade level. What attracted you, and what are some of the crazy things you often hear people say when you tell them the grade level you teach?
Well, at my school and in my district, there are more men than most. So, I teach where there's a guy who also teaches second grade right across the hall. There's a first grade teacher, but Arkansas is dead last when it comes to male teachers. So it is kind of an anomaly in the state. As far as what got me into it, I think it was directly related in some way to gender, in that I started working in a battered women's shelter in high school with the kids in the playroom. And so you'd see little kids who'd seen abuse and they just act out what they've lived. So they'd be punching the Barbie dolls and pulling their hair on day one. 2 days later, they're gently brushing the Barbie's hair and being a lot nicer to their brothers and sisters. So I just realized that men can have this really direct influence, just kind of as models, that there's another way to be a man, that you can be gentle and still be strong, just kind of be a loving influence in their lives. And, I guess the only weird thing I had was in one interview where a principal said that he'd never had it work out with a male teacher because they think the rules don't apply to them, which I was really taken aback by, so I think there are some
Okay.
definite assumptions. I guess the only other one I've heard is that men tend to have messier classrooms, and I wish I could dispel that stereotype, but it's true in my case. The other stereotype.
So that will stay valid, that part,
Yeah,
the messiness.
exactly. I can't really be an example to disprove that one.
Well, for those who are watching or who are listening, nearly 80% of the teaching force is female. So with the additional 20%, and there's also the other category that's growing, you've got 3 men, first and second grade. Yeah, that's almost unicorn status, particularly in a state with a shortage of men. As I shared with you in the group during our call, my first job out of college, I was a 5th grade school teacher, and I wanted to start in elementary school for a lot of the same reasons that you mentioned. So what do you do? You're a dad, you're also an educator. What do you do to keep yourself motivated during these very, let's just say, uncertain times about how teaching and learning is going to be delivered?
I think one of the things about teaching that no one understands is how exhausting it is. But the other thing no one understands is that it can be so renewing. And so I think that's part of it, is that a lot of the meaning is in, of course, the relationships with kids, but also families. Like in one family, they've got 5 daughters, and I've had 2 of their daughters spaced a few years apart, and then I see the other one in the hall. And so it's wonderful to know a family for that long. The families I work with tend to be really deeply appreciative, you know, and then the other thing, of course, is the colleagues, just the chance to work, with networks nationally, like the Teachers of the Year, but also the people at my school, because I just see this really deep integrity and kind of commitment to serve that I think is rare, and so I think that's a lot of what inspires me. The other thing, though, is, I've been able to prioritize family. I took years leave from my district to be a stay-at-home dad at one point when I had young kids. And so I've also been able to kind of balance that in a way that could be hard otherwise. And I do think that this is part of what gets at why there are so few male teachers. Is the reality is that teachers are so underpaid that in a lot of cases you can't really be the primary wage earner in the family. And I do think that pushes a lot of people out of teaching eventually, and I know that for the teachers I know where both are teachers, the husband and the wife, it's a struggle financially, just because of the realities of how that's funded.
Yeah, and that's actually a truth that people want to often overstep, because a lot of the men who I know who either stayed or said, you know what, I stayed because if it was for economic reasons, I would have left a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's conversations of how to supplement education, the income and others. But that is a factor and something that we know a lot of single moms have been dealing with for years. So you've actually received an award for the great work that you do in the classroom, also for what you're doing outside of the classroom. Most people in Arkansas may never get a chance to meet you in person. People throughout the United States who are watching this, really throughout the world, may not get a chance to meet you. So talk to us about the process of, you know what, we think you should apply for X, all the way to you receiving a phone call saying why.
Well, one of the strange things for me is that everyone just votes in the school. And so it wasn't something that I sought out and applied for. And of course, it was really meaningful to go through each stage. But the one that meant the most to me was my colleagues voting for me as Building Teacher of the Year. Because I think sometimes, people get into this role and it's sort of like the longer ago it was, the better you were, right? And so you kind of show, this very polished presentation. When the reality is, we know that teachers experience moments of failure every day, no matter how good they are. And I feel like the colleagues in my school kind of knew the good, the bad, and the ugly, and still felt like I was doing something meaningful with kids. It was a pretty amazing moment. Because for us, it's, you're there at the governor's mansion or state capitol, and you don't know if you got it yet. And so to discover that was amazing. I had my mom and my dad there, and so it was great to be able to kind of acknowledge them, because we always say parents are, the first teachers, and it's really true. I think our parents model a lot of things, not only by what they say, but by what they do. So it was amazing to have them there. And I'd say after that, what surprised me is I thought of it as a reward, and it really feels more like a role, because you step into these policy opportunities. I'd be in a lot of committees in Little Rock where I was literally the only teacher on the committee. which is a separate problem, but it also carries this certain responsibility, and better one than zero. And then the National Network of State Teachers of the Year has done some really meaningful policy work, sometimes in DC at the federal level, but also within state chapters and the territories that name a Teacher of the Year. And so just the chance to keep collaborating with people. You know, I feel like in that network, everyone always thinks they're kind of the underachiever because everyone's doing such incredible things, but they really raise your game, you know, because you see what's possible with kids, and it's inspiring. And the last thing I would say is just that I think what surprises me is that all these Teachers of the Year get incredible results in terms of quantifiable student achievement, but they all begin with the relationship, you know, and that's kind of the core. And, you know, I heard this line from one Teacher of the Year that said, you know, our job is not to raise test scores, it's to help kids live the lives they dream. And the test scores can be kind of a means to that greater end. So it's just a really remarkable group of people that I've been able to collaborate with now for about the past 13 years.
The last point you mentioned about creating people who are just more than their test scores aligns pretty well with some of the work that Dr. Hunter at our institute, he's the founder, and he's talked about the importance of why schools matter in terms of building character, building a moral ecology so that students can be good people across the board and be involved in civil society in unique ways. So glad you mentioned that part. What year were you State Teacher of the Year for Arkansas?
2007.
Okay, 2007. How did your students respond and their families? Because in your state, did you have to leave the classroom for a year, or was it hybrid, or how did it work?
Yeah, I mean, in our state, I think they do it a really sensible way because you take the following year's leave. So it's not like you're leaving in the middle of the year, you're suddenly thrust into this new role. So yeah, I was gone for a year. And, you know, and they were excited, but they, you know, it's kind of like your kids are with you when you do something remarkable. They don't really care because what they care about is that you're there for them and you love them, you know.
Right.
And so they were excited, but I think they kind of took it in stride.
Good stuff. Well, based upon all the things that I've heard tonight and also from our group call, I definitely know why you were chosen as Teacher of the Year. So I want to thank you for that award. And thank you for, as a man who decided to work in elementary school and to do that kind of work, that's important because for a lot of moms and aunts and grandmothers I've spoken to, they said, you know what, it was just good to have a positive role model for my son and daughter to see in class. So thank you for that. Any parting words that you want to share with the viewing and listening audience?
I guess the only other thing I would say is that along the same lines of it being important to have men in teaching, I think I've really opened my eyes in the last couple of years to how important it is to have men of color. And I talked to a lot of friends and other Teachers of the Year, like Abdul Wright, who's the Minnesota Teacher of the Year and has a remarkable story, was actually homeless, living out of his car doing his student teaching. And for so many of these men, I find that they can all name the one male teacher of color they had, you know, at some point in their past. So I think it's something that we need to be advocating for, you know, really at a national level.
Well, thanks for sharing that point. Well, Justin, again, thank you for joining me at In Character. Great conversation, and I look forward to more.
Thank you, Gerard. Thanks for always asking such great questions and inviting teachers in with this kind of partnership. Thank you.